My mother-in-law was a pain in the butt for years, and she finally got her way. Many years ago I met who I thought would end up being my lifelong partner. We dated for a while before he popped the question, and even though it had only been 6 months, everything felt right, and I went ahead with accepting his proposal. At this point, I'd never met his mother, and it was mainly due to distance. I met my then-husband while we were both finishing college, some 7 hours from his hometown, so while we'd spoken briefly on the phone, I hadn't met his mom in person. She seemed nice enough though, but a little fake. After we graduated, we moved together to a large city about an hour from where his parents lived. I started working immediately as a courier, which I enjoyed as I never wanted to be stuck in an office, and it let me get used to the city layout in the first weeks we lived there. I would be sent out to take documents between legal offices, medical offices, wherever it was necessary, and one day one of the deliveries took me into an upscale neighborhood to deliver a packet of paperwork to a lawyer. The delivery was uneventful, but leaving the neighborhood I saw a for sale sign, and I remember it also clearly because that was the day I found my dream home. For context, I was orphaned as an infant and left with an extremely large inheritance. My parents, while only in their mid-20s when they had me, had the forethought to set things up in case anything happened to them, and they died when I was only a few years old. They'd inherited a lot of money when their parents died before I was born, and had an extremely successful business before a car crash sent them to the shadow realm. To put it simply, I wouldn't have to work a day in my life if I didn't want to. My college was paid for, I had not a single dollar of debt, and enough to live on was given to me every month by an auto deposit, but at the time most of my funds were locked up in trusts until I turned 30, at which point I would receive everything. My fiancé, while aware I had money from my deceased parents, had no idea the amount, and I had a long talk with him that same day as I sought to pull some of my trust early to buy the house. He was surprised, not upset, but not expecting it when I showed him the proof. It took a while to get the paperwork done and everything sorted with the lawyer, but I secured the money from my trusts and bought the house after 2 months of us living together. Then his mother declared that she wanted to visit. She hadn't seen her baby boy in almost a year, and she wanted to see what kind of life he was leading. We agreed to take care of driving and picking her up to go to dinner in our city. His mom, while pleasant and soft-spoken on the phone, turned out to be a chatterbox when we went to pick her up. She gushed over how pretty I was, that her son had finally found someone acceptable, and that she couldn't wait to see the cute little starter home we'd bought. It was a long ride as she went on and on about the things my fiancé had done growing up, the things she hoped he'd be able to accomplish, the dreams she knew he had. It was a little awkward. I barely got a word in edgewise, and my fiancé looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him up, but stayed silent as he drove us. Dinner was nice. She was quiet half the time as we were eating, and we made polite conversation at an upscale restaurant. I still remember the surprise on her face when I asked the waiter for the bill, and a comment about how great I was treating him to dinner for a change. I didn't say anything. My fiancé looked ashamed of her for a second, but we quickly moved on, and I didn't want to ruffle any feathers on the first night I'm meeting my fiancé's mother in person. It was during this night as well that I noticed something I would never forget about his mother, and that was that she didn't seem to realize I was the main handler of our finances. We left the restaurant and the drive to our house was pleasant. We talked about the surrounding area, and she commented on the upscale neighborhoods we started driving through. I'll admit, I took a small amount of satisfaction when she got quiet as he slowed down and pulled up the driveway to our house. Once we got inside and she realized the inside was as nice as the outside, she took a seat at the bar and the conversation started up again. Not really though, since it was mostly her talking and us nodding and listening as she droned on. She made comments about him buying the car, him paying for our vacations in the future, and she even insinuated that he financed our house. I let it slide. I was never one to flaunt my wealth, and she, I think, took that as a sign that she was right, but I didn't correct her. The night ended with her being slightly drunk, telling us stories of when fiancé was a baby, and eventually he coaxed her into the car to take her home. By the time he got back I was asleep, and while we didn't really talk much about the visit, he apologized for some of her comments and we agreed it would never be a regular thing to have her over. The next few years of her and our lives revolved around, apart from her constant backhanded compliments, her second-guessing every single thing he paid for. Ever. He knew I was private about my finances. He never told her anything apart from that we were handling things as a couple, and I didn't really care if she wanted to delude herself, so we let it go. We were going to get married in the summer, 3 years after we got together, and it was only months before I was to marry that I found out I was infertile. 100% I would never have children, and actually had to have my ovaries removed due to them being deformed. He still wanted to be with me, despite also wanting children, so we stayed together. One morning I was making breakfast. It was a weekend and he was in the backyard in the garden when his phone pinged a text. It was from his mom and she was asking, "When are you getting the prenup?" I was shocked to say the least, and when I questioned him, he was also visibly surprised that she'd brought one up. We'd not discussed one. I had no intention of ever leaving him as long as he remained the man I fell in love with, and he had no money that he knew of that needed protection. He called her, didn't tell her I was in the room, and it was like she was an entirely different woman. He wasn't on speakerphone, but I could still hear her loudness as she proclaimed I was out for his money. He was barely able to speak as she ranted that he'd bought me a house and cars and given me tons of money to live on, and she demanded he protect the family money in case we got divorced. He eventually got her off the phone, shouting over her that our finances were none of her business and he'd handle himself however he saw fit. It didn't stop though. Every day for the next week she hounded and harassed him about protecting his future in case I decided to take everything and leave him high and dry. It got even worse when his mother discovered I was barren. I don't even know how she found out, as myself and my husband were the only ones who knew, and he never told her. Just out of the blue, she started including in her vitriol rants that I was intentionally making myself infertile so I could keep all the money to myself and not have to share with future children. It hurt. He could see it hurt, and I've never seen him so furious with someone. That particular phone call ended with him screaming that he never wanted to hear from her again and her wailing that I was taking him and everything else away from her. Up soon.